Before I set foot in Palestine, my understanding of the region and of Islam was built almost entirely on what I had read, heard, or been shown through curated narratives. News headlines, geopolitical analysis, second-hand stories, and even academic material had created a sort of cognitive architecture in my mind. That architecture, however, was constructed on abstractions, and neuroscience has taught us that the brain doesn't process abstractions the same way it does lived reality. There is a fundamental difference in how the mind encodes information that is experienced versus information that is told. One recruits the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex simultaneously. The other remains largely in conceptual regions, like the default mode network. I knew this intellectually, but I hadn't yet encountered it on a visceral level. Landing in Palestine was like walking into an entirely different signal environment. The air itself carried different electrical charges, people's voices had different tonal ranges. The spatial awareness I felt while walking down the old streets of Jerusalem or through the alleys of Nablus was deeply immersive. In neuroscience, we talk about sensory integration, how multiple sensory inputs converge to create a cohesive experience, and in this setting, that convergence rewrote my expectations. Every scent, every glance, every call to prayer echoing from a distant minaret contributed to a new neural reality. It wasn't chaos, it was order on a frequency I hadn't tuned into before. The assumptions I held about religion, about faith, and particularly about Islam, were challenged not through debate or argument, but through contrast. My nervous system, over time, began to adapt to what I now understand as a deeply regulated environment, regulated not in the absence of external stress, but in the presence of profound inner coherence. People were not distracted, they were not fragmented, their attention was anchored. That anchoring had a biological effect. My own focus became sharper, my breath slowed, my awareness expanded, I began to sleep better. I began to listen with a part of my mind I had previously reserved only for scientific exploration. Through repeated exposure to daily life in Palestine, I started to understand that behavior is the ultimate truth teller. The rhythms of prayer, the consistency of compassion, the unspoken hospitality, the generosity in simplicity, all of it formed a system that bypassed language and went straight to the body. When you experience people living in harmony with a belief system, not needing to justify it, your brain stops resisting and starts asking better questions. Not "is this true?" but "why does this work so well?" The direct experience of Islamic practice, not in a sermon but in the way people carried themselves, moved me out of the intellectual realm and into something embodied. My perception began to realign not because someone told me to believe differently, but because my mirror neurons, my parasympathetic nervous system, and my emotional recognition circuits were all signaling that I had entered a reality where something profound was happening. One of the most unexpected realizations during my time in Palestine was the presence of an unshakable calm in the middle of what much of the world perceives as chaos. From a neurological perspective, human beings are wired to react to uncertainty and danger with heightened arousal states, elevated cortisol, increased sympathetic nervous system activity, racing thoughts, shallow breathing. That's the biology of stress. And yet, what I saw contradicted that framework. People who lived under persistent external pressures, political, economic, and social, moved through their daily routines with grace, with discipline, and with a visible internal stillness. It wasn't apathy. It wasn't numbness. It was composure rooted in something far deeper than detachment. In neuroscience, we understand that inner calm doesn't come from the absence of stimuli. It comes from the regulation of one's response to stimuli. This regulation is something we can train through breathwork, mindfulness, and behavioral routines that rewire neural circuits, especially those involving the vagus nerve, the prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex. What I observed in the people around me was that they were not in a reactive mode, they were in a responsive state. And this responsiveness was consistent, predictable, and collective. It was as if their entire nervous systems had been trained over generations to synchronize with a rhythm that superseded their external conditions. The key, I came to understand, was submission, not in the way the Western world often interprets that word, but in the neurological sense of surrendering the illusion of control. Islam, practiced as a lived system in Palestine, offered people a framework that reduced cognitive load. The 5 daily prayers, for example, were not interruptions to life, they were the architecture of life. These pauses for prayer functioned like neural resets. I could see it happen physically in people, the shift from busy activity to complete stillness. That moment of alignment wasn't just spiritual, it was biological. Their heart rate slowed, their breath deepened, their focus sharpened. Over time, I realized that these transitions were regulating their nervous systems better than any biofeedback device ever could. The consistency of their routines was equally significant. In neuroscience, we talk about the importance of circadian alignment, waking, eating, working, and resting in a stable rhythm to support hormonal and neurotransmitter balance. What I saw in these communities was an almost perfect synchrony with natural light cycles, food intake, and social engagement. Prayer schedule, the fasting during Ramadan, the family structure, the communal obligations, all of it aligned with the body's intrinsic biological clocks. These rhythms didn't just reduce stress, they rewired the default mode network, reducing rumination and increasing presence. And even more profound was the collective regulation. People weren't just regulating themselves, they were regulating together. There was a neurobiological resonance between individuals that created stability across the community. When people pray together, when they break fast together, when they grieve together, or even when they sit in silence with each other, their nervous systems begin to entrain. Heart rates align, breathing syncs. This isn't philosophy, it's physiology. It's oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin, in all working in harmony, reinforced by deeply structured behavior. I came to realize that this was not the absence of fear. It was the presence of faith, organized in a way that optimizes the mind and body for resilience. As I spent more time in Palestine, one of the most striking aspects of the experience wasn't just the religious practices I observed, it was the way those practices were lived, embodied, and woven into the very fabric of everyday life. It wasn't about what people preached or what they argued for. It was about how they lived authentically according to their beliefs. As someone who spends a great deal of time studying human behavior through a biological lens, I found myself increasingly drawn not to intellectual discourse or ideological confrontation, but to the non-verbal communication that was taking place in the most profound and subtle of ways. The simple acts of kindness, the unwavering patience, the deep respect for elders, the way people interacted with one another, it all came together to form a lived reality of Islam that spoke directly to the brain's mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are a fascinating aspect of the brain. These specialized cells fire not only when we perform an action, but also when we observe someone else performing the same action. This mirroring effect is how we learn behaviors through observation. It's why we can so easily empathize with others, feel their emotions, and even begin to adopt their habits and rituals without explicitly being told to do so. In Palestine, this mirroring was happening constantly, but it wasn't just about observing the behavior of others, it was about feeling it in a way that bypassed intellectual understanding. The authenticity of the actions I witnessed every day was so powerful that it caused a shift in my own neural pathways. I wasn't just learning about Islam as an academic subject, I was internalizing it in a deeply visceral way. The practice of observing and reflecting on others' behavior, the calmness they displayed under external stress, the kindness and generosity extended even in difficult situations. It all activated my mirror neurons in ways I had never experienced before. It became clear that when you witness something lived authentically, it doesn't just stay in your mind as an idea, it starts to embed itself in your body. The behaviors I observed weren't just learned intellectually, they were transmitted through direct embodied interaction. For example, when I saw people pause for prayer at specific moments of the day, it wasn't just about religious devotion, it was a tangible practice of presence. There was no rushing, no sense of hurry or distraction, just a return to the present moment. My brain, in response, began to mirror that behavior. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in my thinking, a slight change in my emotional state, but over time I noticed deeper changes. My awareness expanded, my sense of time became more fluid. I started to crave moments of pause, not as a break from work, but as a way to return to the present, to realign myself with the world around me. This mirroring wasn't just a passive process. The more I observed the way people in Palestine lived their faith, the more my own behaviors began to shift in response. It wasn't through overt instruction, but through a process of neural entrainment, where my brain began to align itself with the rhythms I was witnessing. Just as the heart rate synchronizes in a group setting, my actions began to reflect the values I was absorbing. There was a resonance between my behavior and the people around me, a quiet but powerful shift in how I move through the world. It wasn't about forcing myself to adopt new habits. It was about simply witnessing a deeply meaningful way of life and finding that it aligned with my own neurological need for balance, harmony, and clarity. Islam, when practiced in this authentic way, wasn't something that needed to be explained to me. It was something that needed to be experienced. The experience itself did the work. It wasn't about intellectualizing every aspect of the faith. It was about seeing it lived, feeling it, and allowing it to change me from the inside out. This is the power of witnessing authentic behavior, the brain's ability to mirror, adapt, and adopt behaviors that resonate with its underlying biological needs. The process of seeing people live their faith in an authentic way wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was a biological and emotional transformation that happened not through words, but through experience. One of the most profound experiences I had during my time in Palestine was the sensation that accompanied the call to prayer. The adhan. It was not just a religious ritual, it was an experience that resonated deeply within my nervous system, activating something I had only briefly encountered in my previous scientific studies. Brain's reward system, the sound of the adhan echoing through the streets, wasn't just a signal to perform a religious duty. It was a signal to pause, to reset, and to realign. As a neuroscientist, I couldn't help but be fascinated by how such a simple auditory cue could have such a profound impact on the mind and body. The adhan, with its distinct tones, is not just a call to prayer, it is a trigger. It triggers a moment of collective focus, a synchronized reset. When the call rang out across the city, it acted almost like a switch, shifting my brain from a state of scattered attention to one of singular purpose. From a neurological perspective, this is the activation of the dopamine system, a system that is primarily responsible for reward and motivation. Dopamine, often referred to as the feel-good neurotransmitter, plays a central role in reinforcing behaviors that are essential for survival, learning, and social connection. It is the driving force behind motivation, focus, and the emotional reward we get from completing meaningful tasks. In the case of the adhan, the brain was receiving a reward not through external stimulation or the expectation of a tangible result, but through the mere act of reconnecting with a deeper sense of purpose. Each time the call to prayer resonated, it acted as a cue for my brain to reset, to pause the ongoing flood of thoughts, worries, and tasks. In neuroscience, we often talk about the concept of cue-induced behavior, where external stimuli trigger specific actions or mental states. The adhan was an excellent example of how a single sound could cue the brain to shift from a heightened state of activity to a state of reflection, contemplation, and spiritual focus. The brain's response wasn't a passive one. It actively engaged in that moment, creating a reward loop that deepened with each repetition of the adhan. But the impact didn't stop there. Over time, I began to notice that the adhan wasn't just triggering a dopamine response, but also eliciting a more profound sense of nervous system regulation. When people hear the adhan, they pause their activities and move toward prayer. This transition activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of the autonomic nervous system responsible for rest, digest, and recovery. The physical act of pausing, combined with the rhythmic nature of the prayer, helps counterbalance the chronic stress we often experience in modern life. It's a neurological recalibration that facilitates deeper focus, emotional regulation, and physical restoration. This is not a passive effect. It is an actively orchestrated reset of the body's stress responses, allowing individuals to ground themselves in the present moment. What was most striking was that this reward loop wasn't limited to the individual. It was collective. As more people heard the call and responded, the social brain networks engaged, fostering a sense of shared experience and unity. This synchrony, this collective alignment, amplified the reward effect. It created a biological connection between individuals, reinforcing the social and emotional benefits of group prayer. The social synchronization created by the adhan is similar to the neurological effects we see in group activities like singing, dancing, or even synchronized movement, where individuals experience heightened emotional states due to the alignment of their neural rhythms. In many ways, the adhan acted as a living, breathing force that reoriented the entire city. It didn't just mark a moment in time, it marked a moment in the brain's experience, pulling people out of their fragmented states and into a singular, unified sense of purpose and connection. As someone who studies how sound, movement, and rhythm affect the brain, it became increasingly clear to me that the call to prayer was not just a religious practice, it was a neurological event. Each repetition, each moment of pause, each synchronized act of prayer reinforced the biological alignment that allowed for greater focus, peace, and social connection. During my time in Palestine, I began to see Islam not just as a religion, but as a holistic system for optimizing human behavior. It wasn't merely about belief in a higher power, it was about aligning the body, mind, and soul in ways that supported long-term well-being, resilience, and social harmony. From a scientific perspective, this realization fascinated me because it wasn't a theoretical or abstract system. It was a biological, emotional, and psychological framework that was grounded in daily practice. As I observed people living their faith, it became clear that Islam, when followed authentically, was a carefully designed structure that allowed for optimal functioning on all levels physically, mentally, and socially. One of the core aspects of this system is the balance it provides for the nervous system. The daily practices of prayer, fasting, charity, and reflection are not just rituals. They are practices that have deeply positive effects on the brain and body. For example, the 5 daily prayers known as Salah are more than spiritual acts. They are carefully timed, rhythmical movements, pauses throughout the day that allow the individual to step away from the constant stimuli and stresses of life. From a neurobiological perspective, this act of pausing multiple times a day has profound effects on regulating the body's response to stress. These moments of prayer activate the parasympathetic nervous system, helping to lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and promote a state of relaxation. In a world that is often defined by high stress and anxiety, this practice of scheduled relaxation has a profound impact on mental clarity and emotional stability. In addition to this regulation of the nervous system, the concept of fasting during the month of Ramadan offers even more insights into how Islam is designed for optimal human function. Fasting is not just about abstaining from food and drink. It is a time to recalibrate the body's relationship with its biological rhythms. In neuroscience, we know that fasting triggers a series of metabolic and neurochemical changes that promote neurogenesis and the growth of new brain cells. It also enhances autophagy, the body's process of cleaning out damaged cells and regenerating new ones. These processes have been shown to improve cognitive function, reduce inflammation, and promote long-term brain health. While the spiritual aspect of fasting is important, the biological benefits of this practice cannot be overlooked. It serves as a reset for both the mind and the body, helping to improve focus, energy, and mental clarity. Beyond the individual, Islam provides a framework for social regulation that promotes collective well-being. Charity, or zakat, is a foundational pillar of Islam, and its practice creates a culture of giving that is deeply ingrained in the fabric of the community. This is more than just a moral imperative. It has a profound psychological and neurological impact on both the giver and the receiver. Generosity activates the dopaminergic pathways in the brain, providing a sense of reward and satisfaction. On the flip side, receiving charity creates a sense of trust and connection, reinforcing social bonds and the emotional regulation necessary for a healthy society. The act of giving is neurologically rewarding, fostering feelings of gratitude and empathy, while the act of receiving builds a sense of belonging and social support. This concept of community and social support is woven throughout Islamic practice. The communal prayers, the breaking of the fast together during Ramadan, the shared acts of charity, these are not just religious practices. They are biologically designed to reinforce social cohesion, enhance feelings of connection, and regulate emotional responses within the group. From a neurological standpoint, human beings are social creatures, and the oxytocin system, often referred to as the bonding hormone, is activated through acts of kindness, cooperation, and shared experience. The communal aspects of Islam are not just spiritually fulfilling, they are biologically essential for emotional well-being and societal stability. When I looked at Islam from a purely scientific and biological perspective, it became clear that it offers a comprehensive system that aligns with the brain's and body's natural needs. It encourages mental regulation, nervous system balance, cognitive clarity, emotional stability, and social harmony. The more I immersed myself in the practices and lifestyle, the more I realized that Islam is not just a religion in the conventional sense. It is an optimized blueprint for human behavior designed to promote both individual well-being and collective harmony. In conclusion, my time in Palestine and my immersion in the lived experience of Islam revealed a profound understanding of how faith can influence the body, mind, and society in deeply beneficial ways. What I initially perceived as a set of religious rituals gradually unfolded before me as a well-organized system that aligns human behavior with the natural rhythms of life. From the neural recalibration triggered by prayer to the metabolic benefits of fasting and the emotional rewards of charity, Islam's practices are deeply intertwined with human biology, promoting balance, clarity, and resilience. The adhan, the rhythmic act of prayer, the social structure of giving, and the communal practices all serve as tools for optimizing the nervous system, reinforcing social bonds, and fostering emotional regulation. These practices aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They are lived biological realities that create a framework for individual and collective flourishing. Through consistent observation and experience, I began to see how the structure of Islam functions as a guide for human optimization in its fullest sense, emotionally, cognitively, socially, and physically. Witnessing the authenticity of Islam as it was practiced in Palestine, I realized that the core of the faith wasn't just a theological construct, but a dynamic system designed to enhance human life. It became clear to me that Islam wasn't merely a set of beliefs to be accepted intellectually. It was a pathway to health, peace, and harmony. By observing how these practices were embodied in daily life, I was able to witness the deep interconnection between faith, biology, and well-being, and this realization ultimately transformed my own understanding of human potential.